The 1990s were, without exaggeration, the golden age of British stealth in Hollywood. It was a decade defined by massive franchises, star-driven vehicles, and high-concept blockbusters, but quietly working behind the scenes, often in supporting roles that added depth, nuance, and dramatic weight, was a cadre of British actors whose names never quite made it to marquee status in the United States. Everyone, of course, recognized the heavy hitters: Sean Connery with his unmistakable accent and swagger, Anthony Hopkins with his terrifying elegance, Alan Rickman with his dry venom and scenery-chewing brilliance, Michael Caine with his classic Cockney charm, and Jeremy Irons, who walked the finest of lines between brooding menace and straight-up psycho. These men were unmistakable, but lurking beneath that glossy surface, underneath the tuxedos of Bond, the dragon hides of fantasy villains, and the stately robes of literary adaptations, was another group entirely. A group of hard-working, endlessly skilled, and deeply versatile actors who appeared in some of the biggest movies of the decade without ever becoming household names in the States. These were the secret weapons of Hollywood, the unsung backbone of 90s cinema, faces you recognized instantly, names you probably didn't, and performances that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. Now, to be clear, not all of these actors are British by nationality. Some are Australian, Pakistani, Irish, even American themselves. But these fine men of talent first found their foothold on the stage and screen of Britain before making the Atlantic crossing and arriving into the theaters and onto the VHS tapes of an entire generation of viewers here in the United States. Take Patrick McGoohan, for instance. By the time he stepped onto the set of 1995's Braveheart to play Edward I, the vicious and calculating King of England, he had already amassed a towering reputation in the UK. McGoohan wasn't just an actor. He was a creative force. In the 1960s, he had created, written, and starred in The Prisoner, a surreal and subversive TV series that remains one of the most influential shows of its era. Prior to that, he starred in Danger Man, or Secret Agent in the U.S., where he developed the kind of icy, tightly wound screen persona that would later make him so riveting as a villain. American audiences, however, weren't necessarily familiar with this legacy. While he had appeared in some notable U.S. hits during the 1970s, including Silver Streak and Escape from Alcatraz, throughout the 80s and into the early 1990s, he largely fell off the American radar, surprising when you consider that this was a man once touted to play James Bond. So, when McGoohan appeared in Braveheart, many viewers assumed he was some newly discovered master of menace, rather than a seasoned pro with decades of experience. His portrayal of Edward Longshanks was cold, commanding, and utterly brutal, a king with no time for weakness, no patience for dissent, and no hesitation in dealing out death. He sneered from castle parapets, barked orders with quiet fury, and threw his son's lover out a window without a flicker of emotion. In lesser hands, the role could have been cartoonish or forgettable. In McGoohan's, it became iconic. Despite the impact of that performance, McGoohan never became a celebrity in the conventional sense. Not in America, anyway. His name rarely popped up in gossip columns or talk show circuits, but he kept working, and every time he appeared on screen, he made an impression. In 1996's A Time to Kill, he played Judge Omar Noose with a quiet dignity and a touch of moral ambiguity, bringing subtle tension to the courtroom scenes. And in 2002's Treasure Planet, he lent his voice to the character of Billy Bones, delivering lines with a gravelly urgency that added unexpected gravitas to an animated sci-fi adventure. These weren't lead roles. They weren't showy or headline-grabbing, but they were consistently excellent, and they contributed to a larger pattern that defined McGoohan's career. A refusal to play the Hollywood fame game, paired with an unwavering commitment to doing the work and doing it well. McGoohan was, in many ways, the prototype for the kind of actor this era produced in abundance. British, classically trained, incredibly disciplined, and totally comfortable operating under the radar. He was the kind of performer whose face could stop you mid-scene. The kind whose name might elude you, but whose performances lingered like a well-delivered monologue, sharp, chilling, and unforgettable. While others chased stardom, McGoohan embodied something rarer, a career built not on celebrity, but on craft. In a decade obsessed with youth, flash, and million-dollar paychecks, his presence on screen felt like a throwback to a more serious, more disciplined era of acting. Then there was Joss Ackland, a man whose gravitas seemed to pour out of him like a good port, rich, aged, and impossible to ignore once it hit the senses. With a voice that could command a room even in a whisper and a presence that made you straighten up in your seat, Ackland had the kind of old-world charisma that didn't need flash to make an impact. He played everything from sinister Soviet ambassadors in The Hunt for Red October to warm, quietly wise mentors in The Mighty Ducks and a kid in King Arthur's court, shifting from menace to tenderness without missing a beat. Whether delivering icy threats in a war room or offering gentle advice to a troubled kid on a hockey rink, he did it with an ease that made it look like he wasn't even trying. And then there was Lethal Weapon 2, where he fully leaned into villainy as the smug, tea-sipping South African diplomat who uttered the now iconic line, "Diplomatic immunity," a moment so memorable that it became a pop culture punchline for years. Of course, he didn't make it out of that film alive, but Ackland rarely needed more than a handful of scenes to leave a lasting impression. He had that rare ability to be both aristocratic and grounded, threatening and endearing, depending entirely on the needs of the story. He could be villainous, fatherly, or somehow both at once. His performances always layered, never lazy. And while he was never pushed as a leading man or chased down by paparazzi, Ackland consistently brought more weight, emotional depth, and screen presence to his supporting roles than many headline stars could summon at the height of their careers. He was the kind of actor who elevated a film just by showing up in it, the kind who made you sit up a little straighter when he walked on screen, and even if you didn't know his name, you remembered his face and his voice for a long time after the credits rolled. Bruce Payne, meanwhile, carved out his niche as a Hollywood villain with laser-eyed precision, the kind of actor who could dominate a scene without raising his voice or breaking a sweat. In a decade overflowing with British bad guys, Payne managed to stand out by leaning into the role with a mix of theatrical flair and icy control. If the 90s called for a menacing figure in a leather jacket, whether it was a hijacker snarling threats in Passenger 57, a power-hungry sorcerer weaving dark magic in Dungeons and Dragons, or a shadowy operative plotting chaos in the kind of straight-to-video action thrillers that filled video store shelves, Payne answered with style and intensity. He had a distinct look that set him apart from the clean-cut leads and muscle-bound heroes of the era. With sharp features, piercing eyes, and a gaze that could freeze a crowd, he looked like he belonged in an industrial rock band on one hand and a Shakespearean tragedy on the other. His voice, smooth and deliberate, carried the weight of a classically trained actor, but delivered lines with the sinister charm of a seasoned villain. Watching Payne at work felt like watching someone enjoy the art of villainy. Never over the top, never dull, always calculating. He didn't just play bad guys. He inhabited them fully, as if each one were a carefully constructed machine designed to provoke unease. There was something serpentine in his movement, something elegant in his threat. If Alan Rickman had a darker, more unpredictable cousin raised on comic books and midnight horror movies, Bruce Payne would be it. He was menace personified, flashing that dangerous grin like a warning and a promise all at once. At the other end of the spectrum, though, was Brian Blessed. Now, Blessed might not be what you'd call subtle. In fact, subtlety is to Brian Blessed what silence is to a jet engine. Known for a voice so booming it could knock over folding chairs and a beard you could lose small animals in, Blessed roared through British television and theater for decades, with one of his most notable appearances being in the classic 1976 BBC drama I, Claudius, in which he played the Emperor Augustus in a role that relied less on the bombastic voice and mannerisms of his later roles, but of an extremely vulnerable and often quiet man who is secretly outmaneuvered both politically and personally by his nefarious wife, Livia. On American screens, Blessed would enshrine himself in pop culture with his role as Prince Voltan in 1980's Flash Gordon. And while this would later become the subject of parodies and internet memes, Blessed's place on the American silver screen was still not secured. And it wouldn't be until 1989's Henry V that he would see his momentum gather pace. However, at the end of the decade, Blessed would land 2 high-profile roles in 1999 alone that solidified his place in Hollywood's curious corner of, oh yeah, that guy, fame. That year, he lent his vocal cords to Boss Nass in Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace, the gurgly Gungan leader who presided over underwater political chaos with the authority of a foghorn in a hurricane. Not long after, he showed up again, this time in Disney's Tarzan, as the voice of Clayton, the British villain with a mustache worthy of its own billing. Blessed even provided the iconic Tarzan yell because apparently no one else could bellow it quite right. While Blessed's presence in these films was anything but quiet, his name didn't rocket to global recognition in the way others from the British invasion did. He didn't get the multi-picture studio contracts or the Best Actor Oscars, but his performances, absolutely unforgettable. Whether as a voice, a villain, or a shouting warrior king, he had a way of taking up all the oxygen in a scene, and audiences loved it, even if they didn't always know who he was. Jonathan Hyde, a true master of the supporting role, carved out a space for himself in some of the most iconic films of the 1990s, often without receiving the spotlight he fully deserved. His ability to slide seamlessly into wildly different cinematic worlds made him one of the decade's most dependable and memorable character actors. He didn't just land roles in big movies, he became a consistent presence in films that defined the era. Initially, he was known for his appearance in 1994's Richie Rich, in which he played Herbert Arthur Runcible Cadbury, the rich family's trustworthy butler. But it was his appearance in not one, but two of the decade's absolute juggernauts that would cement his face and his place in American 90s cinema: Jumanji and Titanic. In Jumanji, Hyde played the relentless and impeccably dressed hunter Van Pelt, a character as ridiculous as he was terrifying, a kind of exaggerated colonial specter obsessed with chaos and order. His portrayal was both comic and unnerving, adding a strange edge to what could have been a throwaway villain. Then, only 2 years later, he stepped into the somber, sinking world of James Cameron's Titanic as J. Bruce Ismay, the real-life chairman of the White Star Line. With arched brows and clenched jaw, Hyde brought haughty tension and moral ambiguity to the man many saw as the disaster's ultimate scapegoat. That's serious range, jumping from jungle fantasy to historical tragedy, from gun-toting hunter to guilt-ridden executive. And if those weren't enough, he also showed up in The Mummy during 1999, yet another blockbuster from the era's vault of endlessly rewatchable adventure films. His role as Dr. Alan Chamberlain, a British Egyptologist with just enough hubris to get himself cursed, added another notch to his belt of delightfully pompous men undone by their own certainty. By this point, Hyde wasn't just showing up in 90s classics, he was practically a calling card for them. His on-screen energy radiated precision and pedigree. He had a gift for portraying men who were either in over their heads or entirely too sure of themselves, or more often, both at once. Whether wearing a waistcoat, a uniform, or a dusty explorer's hat, Hyde exuded a clipped intensity that made even his briefest appearances stick in your mind. Always buttoned up, always polished, and always exactly what the scene needed, Hyde perfected the art of making uptight authority figures feel specific, flawed, and strangely compelling. You might not have gone to the theater to see Jonathan Hyde, but you definitely remembered him on the way out. Nigel Hawthorne, widely celebrated in the United Kingdom for his sharp, dryly comic portrayal of Sir Humphrey Appleby in the long-running political satire Yes, Minister, and its follow-up Yes, Prime Minister, made a subtle but powerful transition into Hollywood during the 1990s. Though never a bombastic screen presence or a red carpet regular, Hawthorne brought a distinct brand of intelligence, restraint, and quiet authority to every role he inhabited. In 1994's The Madness of King George, he gave a career-defining performance as the unraveling monarch George III, expertly balancing regal grandeur with heartbreaking vulnerability. The role earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, a rare feat for a performer more associated with cerebral stage work than the glitz of Los Angeles. His portrayal of the mentally unstable king was rich with nuance, and it signaled to American audiences that Hawthorne was far more than a sitcom bureaucrat. He was a dramatic heavyweight. Hollywood took note, and Hawthorne's talents were soon recruited for other ambitious projects. In Steven Spielberg's 1997 historical epic Amistad, he played Martin Van Buren, the 8th President of the United States, bringing a wry and calculating edge to a character often overshadowed by the film's broader moral themes. Once again, he managed to bring an undercurrent of complexity and subtlety to what could have been a throwaway political role, reminding audiences that even secondary characters could carry significant dramatic weight in the hands of a skilled actor. Perhaps most curiously, and yet somehow perfectly, Hawthorne appeared in the 1993 cult sci-fi action film Demolition Man, a movie that managed to cram both Sylvester Stallone's muscle-bound futurism and tongue-in-cheek philosophical musings into the same runtime. As Dr. Raymond Cocteau, the mastermind behind a sanitized, hyper-controlled society, Hawthorne delivered dystopian control with elegance and eerie calm. He didn't shout or sneer. He simply commanded, bringing a theatrical precision to even the most absurd lines. The contrast between his refined performance and the film's high-octane absurdity only made him stand out more. And in doing so, he proved that even in the most unlikely cinematic environments, he could lend sophistication to chaos. At the same time, Hawthorne could also bring a comedic but sophisticated charm which lent itself nicely to children's films, with him being cast in 2 notable Disney animated motion pictures. While the 1985 movie The Black Cauldron was a critical disappointment that lost financially to the Care Bears movie, his appearance at the end of the 1990s and 1999's Tarzan cast him as the bumbling but enjoyable Professor Porter, father to the story's love interest Jane, and was one of Hawthorne's 2 final acting roles before his death in 2001. Whether ruling kingdoms with crumbling minds, steering governments with quiet menace, or enforcing totalitarian ideals in future utopias, Nigel Hawthorne brought a unique blend of dignity, wit, and sharp intelligence to every role. He didn't just play characters, he inhabited them fully, shaping them with restraint and careful craftsmanship. In a decade ruled by brash spectacle and larger-than-life personalities, Hawthorne stood out by doing the opposite, commanding attention, not with volume, but with presence. And then there's Sir Derek Jacobi, one of Britain's most revered and decorated stage actors, a performer whose presence alone could elevate even the most minor scene into something memorable. His background in Shakespearean theater, marked by decades of commanding performances with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre, imbued him with a sense of timing, authority, and emotional range that few of his peers could match. Jacobi had the kind of voice that could cut through noise like a sword through silk, and he knew how to wield it with precision, whether delivering monologues under stage lights or murmuring lines into a boom mic on set. He brought that same classical weight to every role he took on, no matter how brief or seemingly peripheral. By the 1990s, Jacobi was already a huge presence in British and European film circles, with appearances on the big screen with Othello, The Day of the Jackal, and The Odessa File, while on the small screen, perhaps his greatest achievement was I, Claudius, the tale of one of Rome's mightiest emperors. From his rise as a lowly figure in the political household, mostly kept around to be bullied by Caligula, to his reign as one of the greatest ancient rulers. In the United States, Jacobi's name started to make waves with Don Bluth's 1982 animated cult classic, The Secret of Nim, where his voicing of the aged and wise Nicodemus added a haunting mythic quality to the character that lingered with audiences far beyond the film's credits. Come the 1990s, Jacobi had just come off the 1989 Kenneth Branagh epic Henry V, when he was cast in the 1991 neo-noir thriller Dead Again as Franklin Madsen, the sinister antiques dealer and hypnotist in a movie with themes and styles akin to many thrillers of its time like Basic Instinct and Fatal Attraction. In 1996's Hamlet, directed again by Branagh, he tackled the role of Claudius with a chilling blend of guilt, menace, and royal elegance. A performance that stood out even in a film packed with towering Shakespearean talent. And in Ridley Scott's 2000 epic Gladiator, Jacobi brought gravitas and weary idealism to the role of Senator Gracchus, portraying him as a man trying to hold on to the last strands of a crumbling republic. His ability to slide effortlessly between animated fantasy, high tragedy, and historical epic without missing a beat spoke to his remarkable range. Though Jacobi's brilliance was never in question among those in the know, his profile in the United States remained relatively low-key, especially compared to British contemporaries like Ian McKellen or Patrick Stewart. He was one of those actors whose face Americans might recognize from a handful of roles but struggle to name. A quintessential that guy in the best possible sense. He didn't chase stardom, nor did he rely on box office appeal. Instead, he built a career on integrity, craft, and a kind of understated brilliance that worked its way under your skin rather than shouting for attention. His performances didn't just support the main action, they gave it depth, texture, and meaning. For those who paid attention, Jacobi wasn't just another actor in the credits, he was the kind of performer who reminded you why acting matters in the first place. Finally, there's Art Malik. Born Athar-ul-Haqi Malik in Bahawalpur, Pakistan, Malik came to Britain at the age of 3, and after a short time in business, became an actor in the mid-1970s, initially in small-screen appearances. His first big break, though, came with 1984's A Passage to India, directed by the legendary David Lean, before really cementing himself into pop culture by appearing in the 1987 James Bond film The Living Daylights. Here, he played Kamran Shah, leader of the local Mujahideen, who helps Bond escape the clutches of the Soviets and foil the plans of the villainous General Georgy Koskov. It was in the 1990s, though, that Malik finally found widespread recognition when he played the villain in 1994's True Lies, Starring alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis and directed by James Cameron, Malik plays Salim Abu Aziz, leader of an Islamic terrorist group, Crimson Jihad, who intends to detonate stolen Russian nuclear warheads within the United States. Malik said he was drawn to the script's pantomime quality and the chance to work with director James Cameron, and when he appears on screen, he does not disappoint, channeling perfectly the fanatical nature of his character, willing to commit mass murder in the flames of nuclear fire, while even bringing some notable moments of levity despite the heavy themes of international terrorism. While he didn't win any awards for his performance, Malik's appearance as the notorious and vicious terrorist leader is often considered one of the highlights of the film, a genuine and admirable feat when considering the Hollywood heavyweights he was sharing the screen with. A year later, Malik was back playing the villain in 1995's A Kid in King Arthur's Court, where he appeared as Lord Belasco, who seeks to overthrow King Arthur. Despite this being generally a silly family romp, Malik brought with him a perfect mixture of stoicism, sophistication, and slapstick to create one of the more memorable elements of a film already packed with strange theatrical nuances, including early roles for both Daniel Craig and Kate Winslet. Since then, Malik has been in and out of American cinema, spending more of his time on the British small screen, but whenever he does return, either on camera or as a voice, you know he's going to bring his A-game to every moment of his appearance. What connects these actors isn't simply the fact that they hail from the United Kingdom. It's something deeper, something rooted in how they approach their craft, and how they fit, often invisibly, into the machinery of blockbuster cinema. These were character actors playing in the realm of mainstream spectacle, slipping into high-budget productions without demanding the spotlight. They weren't there to dominate the screen or to headline the poster. They weren't molded into franchises or turned into toys. You didn't see their faces on billboards lining Sunset Boulevard, and yet their impact was undeniable. They were the steady, unshakable scaffolding propping up the action, the drama, the grandeur. Without them, the stories would have collapsed in on themselves. They didn't pursue fame in the traditional Hollywood sense. Stardom, with all its noise and flash, never seemed to be the point. They didn't play to the camera in search of celebrity. Instead, they played to the heart of the character, diving deep into the psychology of every role, no matter how small or peripheral it appeared on the surface. These actors had an uncanny ability to make even a few lines resonate, to turn minor parts into memorable moments. There was a gravity to what they did, a sense that every scene mattered, and every word carried weight. They could radiate menace without raising their voices, exude warmth without sentimentality, and steal scenes while technically standing in the background. In an era dominated by seismic action sequences, CGI overload, and loud, brash leads, these British performers brought something that Hollywood often forgot it needed: restraint, nuance, and a deep sense of craft. They were the grounding wires in an industry obsessed with spectacle. Their performances stuck with audiences, not because they demanded attention, but because they earned it. You might not have walked out of the theater knowing their names, but you remembered their presence. You remembered how they made you feel. You remembered that the film wouldn't have worked quite as well without them there, anchoring the chaos with calm, skill, and precision. Now, as time has passed and nostalgia reshapes our memories of that cinematic era, these actors are finally being appreciated not just as background players, but as essential components of the stories we loved. They weren't just support, they were the steel frame inside the skyscraper, the subtle rhythm behind the melody, the brushstrokes that gave the picture its texture. Decades later, the spotlight may have found them more slowly, but it's all the more deserved for it. They didn't demand recognition, but they earned it, scene by scene.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 199 X, we're here just for you.